So, who was Alauddin Khalji? Was he this brilliant nation builder who basically saved India from being completely wiped out and forged a unified empire? Or was he a ruthless despot, a tyrant who murdered his way to the top and then ruled with an iron fist? The story of Alauddin Khalji, probably the most powerful sultan of his dynasty, is just full of these brutal contradictions. And to really get the man, you've got to understand the philosophy that drove him. And this quote, wow, it gets right to the heart of the chilling, pragmatic way he saw the world. This wasn't something made up later. Historians from his own time recorded it. It gives us this really stark insight into how he thought about controlling such a huge and diverse population. For Khalji, it wasn't enough to just conquer. He wanted total, absolute subjugation. So, how in the world do we unpack a figure this complex? Well, here's how we're going to do it. We'll start with his incredible ambition, then we'll track his bloody rise to power. After that, we'll look at the empire he actually built, examine the brutal methods he used to keep it all under control, and finally, we'll try to grapple with the incredibly complicated legacy he left behind. Okay, so our story doesn't start with a sultan. It starts with a guy named Ali Gurshasp, born around 1266. Now, he was the nephew of the sultan at the time, Jalaluddin Khalji. And from his early days as just a provincial governor, he had this ambition that was, well, it was anything but small. He literally dreamed of conquering the world. And this title he gave himself, Sikandari Sani. It tells you everything you need to know about his worldview. He didn't just want to be a king. No, he saw himself as a major historical force, the next Alexander the Great. And this wasn't just some fancy label, it was a mission statement. Everything he did from this moment on was to serve this one single monumental goal. So you've got this massive ambition, right? But how do you turn that into reality? Well, Khalji knew that to build an empire, first you need a throne. And he was not about to wait for someone to just hand it to him. His climb to the top was a total masterclass in cunning, betrayal, and just sheer brute force. I mean, just look at how fast this all happened. In just a handful of years, he goes from being a nobody governor to the absolute ruler of the Delhi Sultanate. The real game changer here was that raid on Devagiri. He didn't ask for permission. He just marched south, sacked this incredibly wealthy kingdom, and came back with a fortune. That gave him the one thing he needed to challenge the Sultan: a whole lot of money. What's so shocking about this is just how personal and calculated it all was. This wasn't a rebellion out on some battlefield. He murdered his own uncle, who was also his father-in-law, by the way, the very guy who put him in power in the first place. He lured him into a trap, and as Jalaluddin was embracing him, Alauddin's men struck him down. It sent a message that was loud, clear, and absolutely brutal. Nothing, not even family, would stand in his way. And this, right here, this shows you his cold, almost paranoid logic. After he took the throne, the nobles who helped him betray Jalaluddin were probably expecting a big reward. Nope. Instead, Alauddin had them all executed. His reasoning was chillingly simple. If you'll betray your last boss, you'll betray me. He used betrayal to get power, then killed the betrayers to make sure he kept it. All right, so he's on the throne, but right away, he's facing a massive threat that had already shattered empires all across Asia: the Mongols. At the same time, though, he saw a huge opportunity. His entire reign would be about two things: defending his northern borders like his life depended on it, and dramatically expanding his empire to the south. Now, the Mongol hordes from the Chagatai Khanate were relentless. They just kept throwing themselves at India. And these were not small skirmishes. We're talking full-scale invasions trying to sack Delhi itself. In 1303, the Mongols actually besieged the capital while Alauddin was away on another campaign. He had to rush back, take shelter in the half-built Siri fort, and somehow manage to hold them off in this desperate defense that literally saved his empire. To really get how big a deal this was, you have to look at what was happening everywhere else. The Mongols were leveling cities like Baghdad and Samarkand. I mean, they were turning huge parts of Central Asia and Persia into wastelands. But Alauddin's armies, they became a firewall. He didn't just win a few battles. You could argue he saved the entire Indian subcontinent from that same terrible fate. But here's the thing, he was so much more than just a defender. He was an aggressor. He launched campaign after campaign, conquering major Rajput strongholds like Ranthambore and Chittor. And for the very first time, a Delhi Sultan's power reached deep into South India. His brilliant general, a former slave named Malik Kafur, led these southern campaigns, bringing back unimaginable amounts of tribute and extending Delhi's authority almost to the tip of the peninsula. So you have this massive army that can beat back the Mongols and conquer a subcontinent. That costs a fortune. So the big question is, how did he pay for it all? The answer is in a series of radical and, let's be honest, often brutal reforms that completely remade the economy and society of his empire. Basically, his entire system of government was designed for one thing and one thing only: to fuel his war machine. Every single policy, from taxes to trade rules, was about getting the maximum amount of money for the state and putting all the power directly into his hands. It was about crushing any possible dissent before it could even start, and in doing so, he created this model of a centralized state that would actually influence Indian empires for centuries to come. He pretty much built his control on these 4 pillars. First, market control. He fixed the price of everything, from grain to horses. This let him pay his soldiers a low but steady cash salary, which was revolutionary. It made the army loyal to him, not to some local lord. Second, military reforms. He brought in horse branding and kept detailed rolls of every soldier to stop corruption. Third, revenue. He raised land taxes to a mind-blowing 50% of the produce, unheard of, but it gave him direct control of the empire's wealth. And finally, social control. He built this huge network of spies that reached into every part of society. And if you want to know how he enforced these rules, well, this policy says it all. The market controls weren't just suggestions, they were absolute law. The threat of having your own flesh cut from your body if you cheated, yeah, that ensured people complied. This was economic control built on pure, absolute fear. His policies also had a pretty sharp religious edge. He was very strict about enforcing and even increasing the jizya, which was a tax on his non-Muslim subjects. Now, this was part of a bigger economic plan to get as much money as possible, but it also reinforced the social hierarchy of his sultanate. His policies were laser-focused on 2 groups he saw as potential threats. First, the Muslim nobility. He systematically took away their hereditary lands and wealth. He even forbade them from marrying each other without his personal permission, all to stop them from ganging up on him. And at the same time, he slammed local Hindu chiefs with crushing taxes because, as we saw in that first quote, he truly believed that keeping them poor was the only way to keep them under control. So what do we do with a ruler like this? A guy who was both a nation-saver and a ruthless oppressor. His reign wasn't long, but its impact was absolutely monumental. And honestly, the debate over his legacy still rages today. Just 20 years. Think about that for a second. In only 2 decades, he fights off multiple Mongol invasions, conquers most of a subcontinent, and completely restructures an entire society's economy. The speed of the change under his rule is it's kind of hard to even wrap your head around. This really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? The contradictions are just wild. He was a murderer who became a military savior, a visionary reformer who was also an absolute tyrant. And somehow, in the middle of all that war and repression, he was a great patron of architecture, leaving behind these incredible buildings. And this reveals the fatal flaw in his whole system. The empire of absolute, centralized control that he built was so dependent on his own ruthless genius that it just couldn't survive without him. The second he died, the Sultanate just fell into chaos. His most trusted general tried to grab power, his sons were murdered, and within 4 years, the Khalji dynasty was totally finished. And that's why today historians and, pretty much everyone are still deeply divided on him. Was he a cruel tyrant whose reign was just a dark chapter of persecution and oppression, or was he a necessary visionary, a state builder whose harsh methods saved India and whose administrative genius created a blueprint for future empires? You can make a really strong case for both sides. Which leaves us with this final, really challenging question. Alauddin Khalji was, by the standards of his own time, incredibly successful, no doubt about it. He built an empire, he secured its borders, he imposed order. But he did it at a terrible, terrible human cost. And it forces us to ask that timeless question about power. Do the ends ever really justify such brutal means? That's a debate that goes way beyond the 14th century.